Hello to everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful week, and I greet the divine in each and every one of you and see our lives unfolding in perfect order this evening. This evening, I'd like to give my talk on a sermon presented by Charles Fillmore. This was on a Mother's Day, actually, in 1925. It was entitled Impotence Changed to Power. And in this talk, Charles Fillmore starts by introducing the idea that the Bible is really the mind of man, and that in order to understand the Bible, we must look at it through the metaphysical interpretations to reach its true spiritual meaning. And so he opens with this statement. He says, "The fact that the Bible and its different departments represent movements of man's acting through the body, and it really is confined to man, to the individual, although it's given as being expressed by nations or by people under time and conditions, expanded conditions, but reduced to its last analysis, it is man." And he goes on to say that the experiences, that it is also the experiences of man. And so the point that Charles Fillmore is trying to make here is that once we recognize that the Bible is really the consciousness or the mind of man, and we're really looking at the mind of God, and it is through understanding that that it is the mind of God that we realize that becomes our guidance, and through realizing this, all of our problems can be solved. He says that the infinite mind, or the mind of God, is that guide to salvation. And by understanding this, when we read the Bible, our metaphysical interpretations of the Bible actually give us the understanding of the mind of God. He continues on in this sermon, and he says that in every word that comes from God is a seed in which is concealed the essence of God. Every word that comes from God, there's a seed that conceals the essence of God. The power of God comes through the word. And he says that we must work out in our consciousness these ideas and the power of the word. And then he goes into an explanation about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch in his scripture that he uses, that comes out of Acts. He says that Philip represents the capacity or the power of the expressed itself in the body. He says that Philip is that vitality of life. It is that higher spiritual awareness that we receive. And he says that now we have man on the natural plane, okay? But then there's two parts to this plane. One is the child of God, and the other is the son of God. And that we develop from the child of God into what is known as the spiritual man, the son of God. And it is that development in which we start to move into a new understanding and a new awareness. And he suggests that we should look at the Bible or learn to interpret and understand the Bible in new ways, in different ways. And that's the idea of similar to what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. It says, "When I was a child, I spake as a child. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away those childish things. And so what he's saying is that as we grew older, we have a new understanding. And it is that new understanding in the Bible that allows us to move into a new spiritual consciousness, a new spiritual awakening. And so this is where he feels that we should start to interpret or look at the Bible, not look at it from our child state, which is our physical state, or the literal interpretations of the Bible, but we must go to the Bible and look at it from our spiritual mind to gain our true understanding, our true wisdom of what the Bible is trying to say. And then he goes on to make another point, which I thought was really powerful, in which he introduces this idea of Mother's Day. And he says that women, and then you got to think of the time period. This was during the early 1920s. So by this time, the women's right to vote was in 1920, 19th Amendment. So by this time, women's were starting to have more of a progressive movement in society. And so Charles Fillmore says that womanhood is fine, but women should not stop there. Women should push forward into spiritual awareness. They should progress themselves spiritually and develop their souls, and not be satisfied just with the idea or the notion of womanhood or motherhood. And he makes a comparison there of men, where men would not be just satisfied under fatherhood. And so he also makes one really powerful point where he says that men and women are the same. And he says that spiritually they are the same. There's just the masculine and the feminine. But in the spirit of the person or of the being, men and women are really the same. And so both must develop themselves at their spiritual levels and try to grow into their spirit or develop their souls. This message is pretty important to me because when he talks about this idea of impotent to power, it's understanding that the power comes from looking at the world, looking at the Bible, seeing the metaphysical interpretations or metaphysical meanings in the Bible. And that is where the power comes from. That is where we actually realize the power in the word, and that word takes on life and energy and vitality, and it translates into our physical world and expresses itself in our physical world. So when we look at the Bible, we have to consciously change gears from the physical to the spiritual. And that's what meditation does. By us going into that meditative state before we read, we are preparing ourselves to receive God's message in a spiritual form. Thank you, and I hope it was a blessing to you.